what you're doing moment by moment. Do you hear that?
Yeah.
It's just keep it simple. Okay, it means not forgetting what you're doing moment by moment. So when you're making the cake, you know you recognise you just did the eggs, and now you know what you're doing, and now the next step is you're not losing the plot. And it's one of the many parts of your mind. Concentration is another, alertness is another, attention is another, intention is another. There are many, many, many parts of the mind, all described in great depth in the text. Mindfulness is just one of them. Do you understand? But it's got this massive meaning that's given to it by many people, as you know, with all these bells and whistles on it, like some almost with a capital M, and it's holy. No, thieves need it. It's one of the many parts of the mind. The key one is concentration. That's a particular, when you've accomplished mindfulness and all the others get you. Mindfulness is a crucial one that gets you to finally have what's called concentration. That's when you're really single-pointed. You've perfected mindfulness. You don't need to use it anymore. You've perfected. You're now permanently on the topic. Okay, so that is when you've achieved. That though is achieved. That necessarily is a subtle level of mind that is not functioning at a gross level as we are in ordinary daily life with our sensory and our conceptual. Do you understand? So you have to ask, why do you want single-pointedness? Why do you want to access a more subtle level of mind, which sounds so abstract to us? Why do we want that? Because that single-pointedness is laser-like, and once you've accomplished this in your meditation, in your daily life, I mean, you can't imagine some of the qualities you'd have, just by keeping it simple. You'd have, first of all, and this is inconceivable in our culture, you'd have effortless and utter and complete control over every single thought. You haven't realised emptiness yet. You haven't got bodhicitta yet. You're not anywhere near out of the path yet, out of the nonsense yet. But you've developed this incredible capacity for unbelievable, effortless, single-pointed attention, effortlessly. Your mind is naturally blissful all the time. Your body's like a feather. You need hardly any sleep. You've got clairvoyance. You've got amazing qualities. This is just single-pointedness. It's not even a Buddhist technique. Come the Hindus. So why you need that? You can be forgiven for thinking you've achieved liberation by having that quality, just that alone. But from the Buddhist perspective, you need that laser-like capacity for focus in your second mode of meditation, which is called where you have to develop insight into the meaning of things. And that laser-like focus can enable you to go to these subtle levels of mind where you do the unpacking and unraveling at a very sophisticated level of all the nonsense in order to get to see the reality, get to see truth, which of course is abstract to us. That's why you need it. But in daily life, it helps you learn to see what the hell's going on in your mind. That's the real benefit in daily life. The real benefit in daily life of having any semblance of concentration is that you're naturally much more aware of what's happening in here. And there's layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of all these different conceptual crazy stories that are going on. Do you understand? And that's the key job in day-to-day life, is to get to know what the hell is going on in our mind well before it gets to the level of emotion, so you can do the reconfiguring, so you can end up having have equanimity and clarity and deal with all your delusions before they go berserk. That's day-to-day ordinary application of it. The result, the benefit of having concentration, the benefit of being able to pay attention without being distracted. Do you understand? So all these things are being present in the moment. They all sound lovely, but it's hardly the point. And that's where I would suggest there's a bit of a misconception that, as if that's the point. So I remember, for example, one group of people, very nice people in one country, doesn't matter where, who were going into prisons, helping prisoners with mindfulness meditation. And there's many variations around, people make up their own. Okay, what to do? You can't help it. And so because of this business of, I would suggest, because we've got this compulsion in our modern psychology we don't want to judge anybody. It sounds rude. So everything's okay. You want to kill 47 people? Oh, poor thing, can't help it. And I mean, I'm not being sarcastic, but we don't want to judge. That's the other extreme of sounding like, because the Christians call about you go to hell forever. So it's sort of like an extreme opposite to you dare to find fault and say something's a sin. Do you understand? But the Buddha's one is very clear. You call negative states of mind, which are the ones that are neurotic, that do cause you to harm others. Look at the world. People harm each other terribly, but they are the ones that also harm you. They're the ones that cause you suffering. So they are negative states of mind. It's very clear. They harm you and harm others. And then there are those that are virtuous and valid, cause you to be happy and to help others. So it's morality. It's good ethics, basically. So with this compulsion to not want to find fault, then there's one of the Buddha's techniques, for example, you practice concentration on the breath. And then you use that concentration to do these different types of meditations called develop insight. And one of those is developing insight into impermanence. And that technique, you use your focus to then scan the experience, the sensations of your body. I've never done it, but it's one of Buddha's techniques. And that's commonly known as vipassana, which is the word insight, but it's one of the many examples of an insight meditation. Buddha gets us to do that with your focus, which is the first mode. You get your focus, then you use it in the second mode to scan the experience, the sensations of your body, or to you even begin to notice your mind, like, oh, that is anger, that is jealousy. That's utterly necessary. But people leave it there and go, you just become aware of that is jealousy and that is anger. And I said to this woman, what do you tell the prisoners to do? Because she was talking to prisoners. Well, what do you do once you've identified anger and identified jealousy? What do you do then? Oh, no, you just observe it. So that's a bit, so I said, okay, well, so you're driving on the freeway, you've got good concentration, and then you're observing that you're driving in the wrong lane. What do you do then? Oh, no, I just observe it. I don't think so. You would quickly judge your action as insane and get back on the right track. So it becomes nihilistic to think you just merely observe the anger. That can be a technique. If you're noticing your mind really well, I'm about to, I'm noticing I'm getting annoyed with you in my own mind, and I catch it and I observe, there's anger. And it hasn't really grown yet. I can easily just tell it to shut up. I will observe it. Oh, go away. Just be quiet. But it's only when it gets rising up, it's just a bit late to say, just observe it. I'm going to kill you, So if you can at the level when it's not even strong yet, just observe it and tell it to but you still would say, shut up, because that's not going to help me. You've got to judge it and decide. It's a bit like, again, the analogy for me of a garden. You've got to have mindfulness or alertness and concentration to observe the difference between weeds and flowers. You have to. And then you have to judge, what will I do with a weed? And what will I do with... You can't say, oh, there's a weed. What good is that? You've got to do action, So mindfulness is one of the many states of mind that are necessary to develop concentration. The long term is concentration. Mindfulness is one, and eventually at some point you no longer need to develop mindfulness because you've perfected it. But for some reason that's known in the world as mindfulness meditation. I don't know why. Do you understand? Anybody else?
Yep.
Where are you?
Let me say yes.
Yes, go, sweetheart.
No, I'm agreeing with you. I understand. You know when it's all quiet?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I'm saying yes.
When it's all quiet, what?
You know sometimes when you go, does everyone understand, then no one answers?
Oh, you're just answering me. Okay, thank you.
Yes,
well done. Okay. Good. Okay. Are there any other questions? Or points to bring up? Clarities to get? Things to think about? Anybody?
Ravina, I was reading in the booklet about the psychology of the
Tantra. Yeah, the psychology of Tantra.
But it did talk about Tantra, and I was wondering, because I haven't had any Tantric initiation.
It's the psychology of Tantra.
I thought it said Tara. So
the psychology of Tantra. Okay. Chapter 4.
All right, I read the psychology of Tara.
No, Tantra. Yes, go on.
So I'm just wondering, in regards to doing my first deity meditation practice,
yes.
If you haven't had Tantric initiation,
yes.
Is it okay to...
Yes. There's certain practices.
Okay.
Yeah. So, certain like Tara, otherwise we wouldn't be discussing it, Yeah, of course it is. Yeah. So anybody else? Somebody else? Questions? Something to talk about? Yeah.
Can I just follow through with the anger part that you said? So if you judge it and you see it,
yes.
What do you do then?
Well, that's the thing. That's where we've got to understand, and I think we can prove this easily ourselves, but we don't think of it like this, that when we say anger, first of all, we say anger, we're usually referring to when it's fully developed and you're out and you're shouting and you're yelling and you're going crazy, right? That's the emotion of it. And that's when your body's involved. You agree your body's very involved, isn't it? Which is why we notice it. But because we don't pay attention to the thoughts deeper down, which we kind of know are there, you're seeing my point, then we don't notice it until it's fully blown, fully grown, fully developed, and at the emotional level. So, when with the developing the skill to step out of your head even every day, starting with a few minutes every day, and you bring that skill to bear in your daily life, whereas once normally you wouldn't notice the anger until it was vomiting as an emotion, now because of the skill you've developed on your cushion, because you've stepped out of your head for 5 minutes, you develop that ability, you bring that ability in your daily life where you become more aware of all the crazy thoughts in there, and you start to hear the thoughts, the angry thoughts, before they become angry emotions. Because all the emotions are merely the tip of the iceberg, and that they're informed by these thousands of conceptual stories, these thoughts. That's what anger really is. Anger is a series of thoughts. So when you recognize at the thought level, before it gets to the emotional level, then you start to argue with it, with the opposite thoughts. I mean, we talk to ourselves, right? We tell ourselves off. We praise ourselves. We do that, don't we? Most of the time we're being negative with ourselves. Most of the time we're brutalizing ourselves. Most of the time we're not satisfied with what we're doing. We criticize ourselves. We feel guilty. We feel embarrassed. We feel ashamed. We wish we're feeling angry with people. We feel hurt. We're always negative thoughts, endlessly raging on. And often we're the result of those negative thoughts. We're the recipient of them, right? Well, that's just heavy duty. We've got to continue to do that job of talking to ourselves, but in a more effective, more reasonable, more kind, more appropriate, more intelligent way. So, in other words, you've got kindness and intelligence and compassion and patience and all these other qualities. You've got those, right? Let's just say you and I are having a chat, or we've just had, and I've said something that's been unkind, let's say, and you're getting hurt, you're getting annoyed with me. Or even I'm just doing something and you can't stand that habit. We're all like that. You know, and you feel yourself getting annoyed. Well, annoyance is a mild version of anger. Wouldn't you agree? I wish she wouldn't do that thing. How dare she? That's called anger, but it's mild. But it's not at the level of emotion yet. And when it's mere annoyance, it never is emotion. So that's why we think annoyance, it doesn't matter, it's just not a nothing. But it's the beginning of an anger. If that keeps growing, it'll become anger. You'll start shouting at me eventually. Do you understand? So you catch it when it's at the milder level. And you've got to have awareness of it. You've got to notice it. It might be true. I might be doing mean things. I might be, snorting and doing horrible, rude habits in front of you, do you understand? I might well be. Pardon?
So do you walk out the
Okay,
room first?
this is where you have to know what your capability is. If the habit your habit, the habit I've got, could you live with me? And we're all human like this, you really get so fed up with it. Because your anger is always annoyed, always finding fault, always criticising. And it might well be a mean habit I've got, a horrible habit. It might well be. It might be that I'm horrible. But from your point of view, if you are constantly recognising that you want to control your mind because you want to suffer, you're sick of all the suffering, and you want to have fights, then the more you become aware, the more you notice it before it gets to the emotional level. And then you've got to recognise your capability. If you really can't control your thoughts, you've got to get the hell away. But often we don't do it. We wait till it's too late when you want to kill me. You want to end up killing each other, and then we blame. But so this is the real wish to see the thoughts in there and grab them before they're too emotional, and then you bring up your other positive, and you literally you talk to yourself, but kindly, I mean, give yourself a break. Come on, then. Whatever method you can use to help you lessen the thoughts. But this is not easy because these thoughts are so strong already. You see, when you've got single point of concentration, or even some semblance of it, in ordinary Western psychological terms, we wouldn't even have an equivalent of such clarity. We wouldn't even have any. There's no ability to have such clarity that we're capable of achieving. So even some semblance of practice of concentration, as well as other practices that you do every day, give you the ability to see the thoughts at an even subtler level when they're really easy to change. And then you don't even you'd never end up having a mental breakdown. You wouldn't end up going crazy. But even the level when we do notice the thoughts when they're at the level of annoyance, already that's really strong. Because in general, our minds are just out of control. But we just consider that's normal. But it's almost like we're living in the Buddhist view, from the perspective of what we could achieve. We're all living in a complete state of emergency all the time. We're all demented, you understand? So it's getting better and better. At first, even recognising your mind plays the main role in your life. Second, wanting to notice what the thoughts are and having the courage to see them all and own them all and not beat yourself up for them, but to be delighted to notice all the crazy thoughts. And that's a big step forward, I promise, because we love to beat ourselves up for them, and that's half our problem. Not do that, but just be conscious and that you don't want to hurt yourself and you don't want to hurt others. That's a powerful awareness to have. That's quite sophisticated, really. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
And it's just constantly and learning all the time to get better and better at not just at doing the job and taking care of your hubby and looking after this and doing that and doing the traffic, but better and better at this internal awareness simultaneously. So you're catching it and learning to police it and be your own friend, be your own therapist. It's just that, but getting better and better. And recognizing those, all these emotions, they're underpinned at a deeper level by being conceptual stories. So how would it look? It depends on what views you've got. So if you've got the view of karma, for example, if I'm Buddhist trying to take the view of karma seriously, we'll talk about it more, as my explanation for why things happen. I've got a relationship with you, let's say, and I recognise there's some karmic connection between us. That would be a serious thing if you're trying to take it on board, like view of karma. We'll talk about it more. Then that could be a method I'd use to argue. Well, Rabina, she's my friend. We've got this karmic connection together, and you're speaking to yourself. Then if she just didn't believe, she just said that you didn't believe your words, and I'm really hurt about this. How dare she not believe my words when I'm speaking the truth? I'm so upset. But if I have the view of karma, I'll recognise that's due to my past lying, and if that's serious for me, that'll be a quick antidote. Then I'll take responsibility for it. Well, it's past karma, honey, relax, shut up and stop blaming her, it's your own problem. That's a serious one, if you're taking it seriously. And that can be an immediate antidote to stop the thought, to stop the unhappiness. Or let's say you just see the anger, I see the anger coming, let's say, in my mind. getting upset with you because you said this or didn't believe my words. Well, it's okay, Rabina. Just because she doesn't believe me, that doesn't mean I didn't speak the truth. Why do I have to have somebody else's believe in me to prove that I'm a real person? I'm perfectly fine, and I did speak the truth. Relax, let it go. Well, whatever method you're able to use that is convincing for yourself enough to help you change yourself. So it's like, if you talk to a 2-year-old, you've got to talk to a 2-year-old in their language, 4-year-old, 6-year-old. So depending where you're at, you counteract it with another positive, valid thought to help calm your mind down. It really is that, and you get better and better and better and better at doing that job. You really are acting as your own therapist. Do you understand?
I do.
And in a way, we do it all the time. One time I might have said something and you get mad at me, and you put the phone down from your sister. Oh, she said that thing. Oh, relax, Roberta, give her a break. She's okay. You counteract it and you let it go. And it's learning to do that more and more. And that means when the serious things happen, it's more painful, but we're capable of working with it. We're capable of not becoming just a complete victim, Becoming more and more accountable for what's in your own mind. Whereas the materialist one, the one we tend to have, is I've got this because she did that, and I'm allowed to be this way because she did that to me, and then we'll never change. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is just recognizing you might have done something horrible to me. That might be true, but because of karma, I accept it, and I know that still my part of it is this. So it's also the other way of saying it is because we're so caught up in our emotions and our relationships that we can't tell the difference between my part and your part. And ego wants to blame you for my bit, and your ego wants to blame me. So we're all the time at each other as if you're the cause of what I'm feeling, and that's why we all go insane. Whereas we can own our own stuff more and more and more and more and change that one. It's like becoming more adult, more brave, more grown up, and recognise you've got your role, I've got mine. Let me do my part. Do you understand what I'm saying? And this is all words we understand, but what's implied here is an understanding of the Buddhist view of the mind and how it works, attachment and anger and all these things, like we've been talking, which we'll talk more. Because it's quite a distinct view. Do you understand? But we've got to have courage to do this, because the impulse of ego is to blame the other person. Naturally, just naturally, naturally. It's really tough. This is the first major step, to have this genuine wish, recognition that what goes on in here is mine and it plays the major role in my life, and it brings like a sense of self-respect rather than blame and guilt. Do you understand? Yeah. Yeah. Go, sweetheart.
Can you ever display assertiveness or engage in...
A bit louder, sweetheart.
Just when it comes to qualities like assertiveness or activism or debate, can you do that from a place of non-attachment and without any ego, and what does that look like?
I understand.
Yeah.
If you hear me talking, I sound quite assertive, don't I? Would you agree?
Yeah.
Don't I?
Yeah, you do.
And debate, there you go, and debating. Am I doing that? So I'm either completely deluded and only coming from aggression and wanting to beat everybody up, or it's because I'm not saying I'm so highly realised that it is possible to be that way and still coming from the right place. So our problem is when we hear anger, then we hear the opposite as passivity. That's just completely gross misunderstanding. And so in the end, if you think of giving up anger, giving up jealousy, giving up attachment, if you misunderstand it, you throw the baby out with the bathwater and become this boring, pathetic, nothing person. Because it's much more nuanced than that.
But how do I recognise, I guess the point is to recognise whether I'm coming from a...
Precisely, darling. That's the whole point. That's it. It's not like, how do I recognise I'm playing tennis right? By learning it properly. How do I recognise I'm playing the right note? By learning it properly. How do I know if I'm being angry or jealous or compassion? By learning Buddhist psychology properly, because this is a distinct Buddhist approach. The words aren't unique to Buddha, compassion, love, attachment, but his interpretation of them is utterly unique to the Buddha. And I can't stress that point enough. I'm not forcing you to believe in Buddha's or have Buddha's view, but every word I'm saying in this room, using words we all know, love, attachment, anger, but Buddha's distinct interpretation is quite different. So if we want the Buddha's understanding, we have to know what he means by these qualities. Then that's like our music that we're following. So how do I know if I'm doing it properly? If I'm deciding I want to be a Buddhist, I've got to see what Buddha says. Am I doing what Buddha's saying? He's my musician. You understand? That's where I'm getting my instructions from. Do you understand that point? That's really a serious point. Not just thinking, oh yeah, I'm doing it and making up my own. You can make up your own. You're allowed to, but don't call it Buddhism. You see my point? That's a really important point, actually, because these words are so normal, and no one owns them, including Buddha, but he's got a distinct interpretation of these qualities and what you do with them when they arise and how to define them and understand them. Do you understand? What else, people? Anything? Questions? Yes, Chris, go. Yeah.
The meditation we did.
Yes, right. Exactly.
So it's focusing on the thoughts.
In this case, it's a concentration meditation, and concentration you can use different objects to focus on. A typical one is the breath that the Buddha taught that. But in this case, it's a more advanced one. We decided we'd focus on the thoughts that arose in the mind to see if we could do that.
I have lots of thoughts.
That's right, precisely.
Like a thought and say that is a thought.
Well, just no. It's basic. No, what it ends up actually being, what it ends up being, you keep. It's like there's two parts of yourself. There's the part of yourself that's called focusing. It's as if you're watching a television with lots of conversations going on, but you're not buying into any of the. You're not having a conversation with them, and you're not interpreting them. You're just listening. You're just watching. You're just observing. That's what it is.
And so one other. Sorry.
Yeah.
There's a novice.
Yeah.
They don't want to meditate.
Yeah.
What would you?
Well, I would. To start with, it would be the best to start by learning to concentrate on the breath, and we'll do that before we go as well. That will be a good one to start with. You just, instead of the mind, you do all the other things that I said, but the thing that you'd locate as your focal point would be the sensation at your nostrils, the air hitting your nostrils, which is a more easy thing to locate. That's what you would focus on. You'd pay attention to that. Every time your mind gets a bit weak and spacey, but you grab it and you just keep paying attention to the breath. That's the one to do. 5 minutes of that starting. And there's some, that would start. Good start. Okay, so I think okay. So if the end result of all this work, long-term goal, is Buddha, Sangye, lessening, rid of the delusions and perfecting the goodness, speaking simply, then clearly that implies the job is to distinguish between the neuroses and the goodness. That's the job to be done. And then we can understand the Buddha's understanding of how those thoughts play out in our lives, because we're embodied. We have body and speech. This is evident. We have the body, the speech, and the mind. And the Buddha's emphasis is what goes on in the mind is the boss. It runs the show. So it's obvious if whatever we think and do and say, which is the view of karma, this law of karma for the Buddha, sows seeds in my mind, programs my mind. And these seeds will eventually ripen in the future as my own experiences. This is Buddha's view. As Dalai Lama calls it, self-creation. So let's look at this a little bit more, Because all the nuts and bolts, the essential points of Buddha's psychology and philosophy at the earlier stages of practice, which inform the rest of our practice, obviously, are the view of karma and Buddha's interpretation of how the mind works. And these utterly go together because it's the mind that creates karma. It's the mind that's the boss, that starts the ball rolling in the actions we do with our body and speech. So to understand the process of karma, number one, and to understand the mind, number two, these are the fundamentals that imply the tools that we would use as Buddhists in our daily life to help us lessen our neuroses and grow our goodness, lessen the growing of negative seeds and the growing of the positive seeds. That's the practical way of describing what being a Buddhist is, actually. And that's the so-called wisdom wing. A bird needs two wings. The other one, the compassion wing, that's the Mahayana path. That's the Bodhisattva path, in this context, in this framework here. And that's where you then continue to work on your mind. There's never a difference. But it's in relation now to how to help others. So all the emphasis on the earlier stages of practice, as we're describing here, abiding by the laws of karma, working on our mind, this is the wisdom wing. And this gets us this to some degree of growth in this practice, the result would be a really marvelous person. A person who's in charge of their own life, who's accountable, who takes responsibility, who knows that they're the fruit of their own past actions, who's given up blaming others, who's got less attachment, less anger, less fears, less jealousy, less depression, doesn't harm sentient beings. So that kind of person, you'd be this marvelous, content, fulfilled person, which is exactly the person we want to become. Buddha says we've got this potential, and this is just the first stages of practice. Then we continue to work on the compassion wing. So the beneficiary, you could argue, the beneficiary of the wisdom wing is yourself. We often think that sounds selfish in spiritual teachings, but that's such a mistake. You've got to put yourself together. You've got to know yourself intimately. You've got to know what your own delusions are. You've got to know what your own suffering is. You've got to know what your own potential is before you can begin to help others. It's sort of evident. So you're the recipient of this first stages of practice. You're the recipient. You're the beneficiary of the wisdom wing. Others benefit too. As Lama Zopa says, all the rats and cockroaches will have a party because you leave them in peace. Not to mention husbands and everybody else, because you'll be nice to them, But you're the main beneficiary. The emphasis in the wisdom wing is the benefit for yourself, knowing yourself intimately and well. It comes and it brings a sense of self-respect, Then you continue to work on your mind, but now the next stages of practice, and we do all these together in daily life, we do all together, really. But talking in terms of levels of practice, the more advanced level necessarily is now you continue to work on your mind, lessening these neuroses that now are the one that you see are now what are causing you to be separate from others. So breaking down the barriers between self and other. This is the development of compassion and love. So they're very distinct, different types of practices. Often in spiritual teachings we just glop them all into one big soup. But there's very distinct levels of practice. You first control your body and your speech, then you control your mind, then you can begin to continue to work to lessen, to break down the barriers between self and other. And all of those barriers are created by our own neuroses, the Buddha's view is. So it's this constant job of lessening delusions and growing your goodness, growing your virtue, growing your wisdom, growing your clarity. So that we need to understand how karma works. We need to understand how the mind works. These are the fundamentals of all Buddhist practice. Then we can go to the more advanced levels of compassion, then we can go to the more advanced levels of the Vajrayana, and the advanced levels of the Tara practices and all these practices. Then we can go to the more advanced levels because we've got a basis, And that's why it's so important to remember that all the Buddhist teachings are progressive, are incremental, are gradual, like all bodies of knowledge. You can't just leap into grade 10 music without accomplishing grade 9. You can practice grade 10, but you won't accomplish it till you've got grade 9. You won't accomplish that till you've got grade 8. And the way especially the Tibetans have presented the practices, it's this nice packaging of the teachings. It's kind of very interesting in this coherent, orderly, incremental way. And it takes time to see that because, like I said, we think of spiritual teachings as one big soup, It's not like that at all. So the contents of our mind, of our consciousness, of our mind, like we said before lunch, the wonderful. It's really kind of inspiring to hear in the text the way Buddhism describes the nature of our mind, our consciousness, this non-physical process of cognition at different levels. It includes all the intellect, the thoughts at a subtle level, our emotions, instinct, intuition, this entire spectrum of our inner being. And our job as a Buddhist is to unpack and unravel and reconfigure this mind, to be utterly in charge of what goes on in this mind. Which is, again, like I'm saying, is not how we think in materialist psychology at all. It's an extraordinary way of looking at the mind, most unusual. So the mind is not physical, Buddha says. It's fundamental. It's the cognitive process itself. You can learn neuroscience. There's no problem with that. Of course you can. You can be a genius at it. But in the end, you don't need to know whether your brain is in. You don't need to know whether your anger is in your toenail or your ear for you to hear the angry thoughts and know you can argue with them. That's very clear. To be your own therapist, it won't necessarily help you to know which part of your brain is triggering, To be your own therapist means being aware internally in this really focused way of what on earth is going on in here, so you can start to work with it and reconfigure it. That's the day-to-day job. That's the day-to-day job. Because that is then what informs the actions of our body and speech, which is what leaves seeds in the mind that will produce our future experiences. So it's moment by moment working with your mind, but the analogy of a gardener is a really good one. Because there's a lot of talk in people's interpretation of Buddhism as sort of being in the moment, being, like you said before, being present. They're lovely words, nothing wrong with that. But there's a bigger framework there. You know, so you could argue to be a really good gardener, you absolutely have to have good concentration. You have to be in the moment. You have to have good mindfulness. You have to have good concentration. You have to have. But you've got to look at the bigger picture. What are you doing as a gardener? And this is the point. By definition, a gardener is a person who is choosing a thing called a seed, and that they decide to put it in the ground and grow it based solely on the fruit it will bring in 5, 10, 20 months or years. So why you want to be in the moment in the garden is so you choose the right seed that will produce the future. This is a really good analogy. So just to think it's only being in the moment, that's idiocy. That's nihilism. Walking through your garden being in the moment, then you'll never know what seed you're planting and you'll never get a garden. What's the point? It's like idiocy. It really is idiocy when you think of it as only that. And the gardener is a great analogy. The only reason you want to be mindful as a gardener, the only reason you want to be in the moment in a garden is so that you know exactly which seed to plant, because you can't tell by looking at this boring little seed whether it's a rose or a dandelion. You've got to have intelligence. You've got to imbue your being in the moment. You've got to imbue your being in the present. You've got to imbue your mindfulness, your concentration, with intelligence called botany. So you can choose the seed you plant and know where to put it in the ground and know how to nourish it so that it will bring in the future the right result. This is such a perfect analogy for karma, but it's so how we do not think when it comes to who we think we are, in spiritual practice. Because, in other words, a gardener is a brilliant gardener based upon the end result. So you have to know what seeds to plant, and you have to have the intelligence to know what seed to plant, and you have to have the wherewithal and have your wits about you to know how to put the seed in the ground so that with concentration and mindfulness. But it can't just be the concentration and mindfulness on its own. Walking in your garden, being present every day. What good is that? You've got to have intelligence that knows which seed to plant, and that is defined by the fruit you want in the future. So that's the way to talk about being a Buddhist. What do I do with my mind? What do I do with my body? And what do I do with my speech? On what basis do I choose actions of body, speech, and mind? Well, the basis is the basis of morality, the basis of good ethics. To refrain right away first from sowing seeds in the ground of my mind that will ripen in the future as my suffering. First level is that. Don't even worry about growing the flowers yet. Just refrain from sowing the wrong seeds. That's the first level of practice. That's already a sublime level of practice. So the first level of practice, at least don't grow more weeds. So you've got to identify a weed, don't you? You've got to identify what is a weed seed. You've got to identify it. You've got to know. So that means we have to, if we're taking Buddha's view, we're going to know what Buddha means by what is a negative action. What is a negative action that I'm attempting to refrain from? What is it? We've got to know that first. You don't have to take Buddha's view. You can use your own view if you like. I don't mind whose view you use, but here we're talking Buddha's view. This is your first level of practice. Refrain, at the very least, first most urgent level, stop sowing more negative seeds. So what's a negative seed? A negative seed is one that by definition is one that will ripen in the future as you're suffering. And what does that mean? Well, the simplest level of suffering, we take the Four Noble Truths, Buddha's teaching on the Four Noble Truths. The first one is there is suffering. The second, there are causes. The third, that you can get rid of the suffering and its causes. And the fourth is how to do it. Speaking very simply, it's very practical. So the first one is there is suffering. Well, what is suffering? There are 3 levels of suffering. Let's look at the first level. Forget the second two, they're more fancy. The second level of suffering is when bad things happen. It's very simple. Look at your own life. We all know that. We don't need to be taught. Punched in the nose, not getting what you want, someone harming you, bad things happening, getting sick, the wrong things happening. We all understand that naturally, instinctively is what we know we don't want. It's called suffering at whatever degree of it. We know. We all know. Look at the world. We know what suffering is at the first level of suffering. Don't let's get fancy yet and get more sophisticated. Buddha gets more sophisticated about what suffering is. Wow. This is the first level, is a no-brainer. So then you've got to ask yourself, well, okay, that's interesting. Well, it's getting killed. Well, I would say that, that's suffering. Being lied to, yeah, that's suffering. Being punched in the nose, yeah, this is karate, that's suffering. You don't mind in karate. In fact, I was taught that I should apologise, If I punch you, if you punch me, I should apologise because I didn't get out of the way in time. So it's a different method. So you go, well, it's being stolen from suffering, yep. Is being sick suffering, yep. Is being lied to, yep. So we know we don't want that. It's kind of a no-brainer. So here we're taking the Buddha's view that what I do now produces my future, and that's already a big leap for us. And that indeed that what I am now is the fruit of what I've done before. And that's easy to see. Do I like, what's your name again? Back there, I met you yesterday. Eva, that's right, Eva. Eva, we met at the Buddhist Society of Victoria in Malvern the day before yesterday. So let's say, Eva lies to me just now. How dare Eva lie to me? That I'm using Buddha's view. Or do I like lying, being lied to? The answer is no. Well, that's called suffering. And Eva's kind to me. Do I like Eva being kind to me? Yes, that's called happiness. Speak simply, okay? Don't forget long-term, big, fancy stuff. Ordinary first level. Get it down. First level. The first level of suffering for the Buddha is when the bad things happen. Okay, he's talking in a more extensive way, including rebirths. So we're taking the view here of karma, not just immediately now, but the bigger picture that my consciousness came impelled by my past actions, programmed by my past actions, came into my mummy's, egg and sperm at the time of conception, programmed with my tendencies and all the karmic seeds that are producing each moment my life experiences. This is the basic view that Buddha has. So there's Chris, for example, He's got a human body. The first way his past karma has ripened is his mind from his past life went to a present human mummy's womb. First point. All of us the same. That's the first way our karma ripens. There are four tracks of karma, if you like. The second one is if Chris looks into his mind, he's got a series of tendencies, a series of qualities. He maybe likes to, he might like to kill or like to steal or lie or be loving or compassionate or wise or good at football or good at accounting, whatever. We all see our mind. We've got personality traits. Well, contrary to the materialist view, they didn't come from mummy and daddy. They're not the product of genes and DNA. They can be affected by mummy and daddy and genes and DNA, no problem. But the cause of them is Chris's past doing of those very actions. So really this one way of talking about karma is just a bunch of habits, our own tendencies. And we come programmed, Chris came programmed, like us, at the time of conception with his own tendencies, a bunch of them. These are all triggered not more than a few weeks before that at the time of his past death. This is all dealt with in great depth in the Buddhist literature. It's all there. This view has been around for thousands of years, much longer than the Christian view, much longer than than the Jewish view. It's much longer than, maybe not longer than the Jewish views, it's true, they've been quite around for a while, haven't they? Certainly longer than the Muslim views. The third way Chris's karma ripens, this is all of us, just using him as the example, is how we're seen and treated by other people. Since we're born, we can see we're very social creatures, aren't we? We live in a world of other beings, and they're mostly beings who either harm us or help us. We can see that. The vast majority of beings on this planet do neither to me. They're the strangers. But we have the enemies and the friends and the strangers, don't we? So all this, the way, since we're born, all the experiences we've had at the hands of others, they've been mean to us or kind to us, they too are the fruits of past actions planted by me, by my actions similar to that. And even the physical world, the way it impacts upon us, is called environmental karma. There's 4 ways karma ripens. Environmental karma, the way the physical world impacts upon you. Experiences similar to the cause, the way beings impact upon you, how they see and treat you. 3, your own experiences, your own tendencies themselves. And 4, your own very humanity, or your dogness, or whatever it is, what type of rebirth you've got. This is the Buddha's view, basically. So the idea is we're not made by God, with respect to Christians. There's no superior being has a job to make us. For Buddha, that's the weirdest idea, frankly. I'm not being rude or anything. And you're not made by your mummy and daddy. They play a role. They give you a body. Guaranteed they give you a body. That's clear. But they do not give you a mind. That's crystal clear from the Buddhist perspective. And that's a radically different view. So already even hearing this and even deciding to take this on board as your working hypothesis, already the change in your life is stupendous. Because it stops the victim mode. Because the victim mode is, I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault. Which is how we all think. And that's reinforced by our materialist views. This is a huge impact of this view, if you take it seriously. And if you say you're a Buddhist, then you'd better take it seriously. I mean, you don't have to, but you can't say you're a gardener, but never grow a garden. You're lying to yourself. So if it is true then that I know I want happiness, bare minimum, this is the first level of not suffering. The next level of suffering is more subtle. Even the third level is even more. There's 3 levels of suffering in the First Noble Truth. This is the most obvious, evident level. It's immediate to anybody. I know I don't like bad things happening to me. I know I don't like bad things happening to me. And if you want to add to that, which is more abstract for us, I know I wouldn't like to be born as a dog, or not to mention other beings that Buddha would assert exist. That's pretty abstract for most of us. That all fits with the Buddhist view, you know. Because all sentient beings are experiencing the fruits of their own actions. All beings. And it's not punishment, like I said, and it's not reward. There's no concept like that. Because in Buddhism there is no punisher and there is no rewarder. This is an amazingly important point to get. So, if it's true, I know I don't want suffering. I'm a gardener, and I know in the future I want a beautiful garden, please. I know that. I know I want veggies and fruits and lovely trees and this and that. It's the simplest analogy. And so when I know that a future garden is in my hands, I have to sow the seeds now. I can't wait for a garden. I can't wait for someone to give me a beautiful garden. What's wrong?
Oh,
We just
sorry.
wondering if we could pull the curtain across.
Oh yeah, pull the curtain across, come on. Absolutely. You looked like you were trying to escape from something. I couldn't quite put that wrong. Okay. So it's this whole idea, and this is where when we talk about spiritual practice, we get so obsessed. There's a lot of talk about it's all being in the moment. Everything's just in the moment. Be aware of the moment. You've got to be aware of the moment. Be in the present. You're right, like the gardener. But the reason, like I said to you, the reason to be in the moment is so you can build a garden in the future. So we're trying to grow the garden in the future. Which is the garden, which is me. I'm my future garden. It's simple. I know I want happiness. I know I don't want suffering. I mean, in ordinary terms, we get this. I know if I'm going to live for another 20 years, I know I want my body to be healthy. I know I want my body to be healthy. If I'm going to live, I know if I'm going to live another 20 years, I want some money in the bank. I want a reasonable situation. We get this in ordinary terms. We know we are responsible. I know that what I do now with the food I put in my mouth here produces my future body. We get the concept of what I do now informs the future. We get that when it comes to ordinary life. But the moment we get to spiritual or Buddhism, we just become weird, you know. It's kind of very nihilistic. It's very strange. So having the view that my future, and we're talking about here once I die, not to mention tomorrow and the next day in this body, that my consciousness, the type of rebirth it gets, the tendencies in my mind, my experiences, it's up to me. I'm in control of that. I mean, it's a very shocking view, very bizarre view, you know. It's up to me. So, and it's based upon, do I want suffering? Nope. Do I want happiness? Yep. So think of ordinary life. This is ordinary level, ordinary world, ordinary view. If you take on view theoretically the view of karma, which means that when I die, my mind will continue in a direction that I have already programmed. I'm the one. There's no one up there running the show. There's no one pulling the strings. There's no one punishing and rewarding. There's not. You could argue, in the way we're talking about the Buddhas, and we haven't gone into that very much, and you know, that a Buddha who is a being who has accomplished all this is a very powerful being full of compassion, so they can certainly help. It's like a good doctor, no question. You rely upon the Buddhas, there's no doubt. There's no question. But we're talking about the job that we have to first be responsible for. Then I have to make sure what seeds I plant. So the first one is don't plant the negative ones, which means Buddha gives a little list of 10 things. 7 of the body and speech. Don't kill. Don't take things that are not given. The stealing in Tibetan is very direct. Don't take the ungiven. And don't jump on the wrong partner. Very bare minimum. Don't misuse your body doing actions that are based on anger and attachment to harm sentient beings. At least refrain from those. Why, Buddha? Because Rabina Sweetie Pie, if you do those actions, they will produce seeds in your mind that will ripen as future suffering of your, not to mention lower realms of suffering, Buddha would suggest, but even if you can't cope with that one, at least you won't get killed, lied to, or be stolen from, or whatever the actions are. Because the Buddha says whatever we do and say and think produces those experiences in the future. The concept is very simple, but it's so shockingly different. And even if we're Buddhists, we might have heard this 1,000 times, it still doesn't go in. We don't use it to interpret our daily life. How dare she do that to me? It's not fair, we say. We forget all about karma, you know. It's a real way of describing the world. It's a philosophical view that describes the world, describes your life to yourself. And then you use it as your basis for what seeds to plant, for how to be in your daily life. So the very least starting is with your body and speech. No discussion about the mind yet. And then several actions of the speech. Refrain from lying, refrain from bad-mouthing, abusing people, refrain from, talking bad things about people behind their backs, refrain from rabbiting on about nothing. 4 little things of speech, 3 little things of mind. I mean, there's probably 100 instructions just to drive a car. This is just 7 baby instructions of how to ensure, Buddha would say, if you refrain from these, that you can guarantee that when you die, you'll get another decent human rebirth. This is how they talk. It's very simple. It's how they talk. Very simple. This is Buddha's view. So clearly, the first stages of it, you're taking it as a hypothesis. What else can you do with it? You've got to start with something. Then you can start to have the space, having disciplined your body and speech. Now you can go to high school, the next level of practice, and this is where you can start to get serious and get some concentration under your belt, and then start to learn Buddha's botany, learn Buddha's psychology, understand the contents of this mind of ours, and what is a negative state of mind, what is a positive one, what defines these actions, what defines these states of mind, how can I recognize anger in my mind, how can I recognize compassion, how can I recognize intelligence and kindness. These are all distinct, different states of mind. Thoughts. At the moment, there's like a big soup of emotion mixed in a soup, like pureed soup. We can't tell one bit from another. And that's the clarity we need to develop. Based on concentration meditation, you get clearer and clearer and more wise and able to delve deep into your mind based on understanding Buddhist psychology, so you can identify the different parts of your mind and become more skillful at being your own therapist. And now you can really start to get to the root of the problem, which is to start changing the thoughts themselves. This is the wisdom wing. This together is the wisdom wing. This together is the development of renunciation. You're giving up suffering and its causes. This is the essence of the basis of a Buddhist practice. The basics, the nuts and bolts. So, like I said, the result of this, you'd be this marvelous person. You would have harnessed your energy, your body, speech, and mind. You'd be in complete control of what is going on, to whatever degree. You'd have some self-respect. You wouldn't blame others. You wouldn't be a victim. Your anger wouldn't be out of control. Your jealousy wouldn't be out of control. Your depression wouldn't be out of control. And I'm not talking high-level practice yet. I'm talking solid, good day-to-day level. Yeah. That still the crazy thoughts are there. You've got a long way to go, but you've got more courage and more confidence that the rubbish doesn't define you. You can learn to live with all the crazy thoughts. If you haven't got single point of concentration, then you're not totally in control of your mind by any means. But more and more of doing this work, you get more confidence, more clarity, more contentment, more awareness, more fulfillment, and therefore gradually becoming more kind and more wise, It's gradual, incremental, step by step by step. You become your own therapist. You become your own boss. You become your own friend. It's like saying that, So, okay, if I do an action that's called a negative action, which is one that's an action that harms another, which is an action I do with my body and speech, which is informed by a delusion, and that'll sow a seed in my mind that can ripen any of those 4 ways in the future. And I don't want that suffering, then I have to know exactly how to define what a negative action is, don't I? So, there's different... So Buddha talks about an action that would be a complete action. So let's just look at a virtuous action of intentional non-killing. Let's say Eva's got a mouse in her kitchen. So for that action of her intentionally deciding, I will not kill that mouse, and saving the mouse and releasing it, for that to be that would be called a complete action of non-killing. And you can extrapolate and see that a complete action of killing will be the same thing, but the opposite. And you'll hear. So in order for it to be a complete virtuous action that drops a seed in her main virtuous bank vault, which would be one of the seeds that is triggered at the time of her death, which in this case determined her rebirth as a human, and this is literally how they talk, then there need to be 4 things in place when she does that action of non-killing. Well, the first has to be there's got to be a living mouse there. The object of her action, a living mouse in this case. The second is her mind involved with it. And these are the crucial components in any karmic action we do. Our mind's involvement in it, and you'll get to see my point. And there's more parts to it than this. This is a simple way of presenting it. There are 2 parts here, 2 simple bits. One is the intention, the volition, the bare bones thought, I will save that mouse. I will not kill that mouse. Intention doesn't mean like good intention. Here it's bare bones volition. I will. And this is the meaning of the word karma. Intention. This is, if you want to find a boss inside here, it's called intention. And everything we do with our body and speech is driven by an intention. But because most of it is programmed, we don't even notice. We don't even notice most of what we do or say because we're not conscious of our mind. But if there's no intention, the body will not do a single thing, I promise. So here, there has to be the intention, I will save that mouse. I will not harm that mouse. I will not kill that mouse, whatever it is. The second part in her mind, the crucial piece, the absolutely central piece, is her reason. We'd call it her reason for not harming the mouse. And we could say, or her motivation. And we could say that's compassion. Intention and motivation so completely come together, we can hardly tell the difference. Like if it's the intention to kill the mouse, then the motivation, which is aversion, disgust, how dare a mouse be in my kitchen, is so totally linked with, it's like simultaneously arising in my mind along with the intention. There's almost no separation between the intention and the wish to kill. It's like it's immediate. We don't see the difference, but there's this crucial difference. The thought, I will not kill the mouse, and her compassion. The compassion is the motivator, is the key factor. In fact, the motivation is the key factor that determines the character of the seed she plants in her mind, which determines the future karmic result. So not even the intention, not even the intention. Intention is the meaning of karma, but what makes it negative or positive is her motivation. So in this case, compassion for the mouse. That's the second step. The first one is the living mouse, object. Second, her mind involved in it. The intention to not kill, motivated by compassion, coming together. Third, the action. She picks up the mouse. Fourth, the result. Happy live mouse. Thank you. Goodbye, Eva. That's a complete action of non-killing. You flip that over. The mouse, the intention to kill, the motivation, aversion. Second one. Third, you do the action for dead mouse. That's a complete action of killing. And in each case, the motivation, that one piece, that's the key factor that determines whether the action she does is a so-called negative action or a so-called positive action. And this is why we have to completely refigure our minds. Because at the moment, Buddha says, we're programmed with attachment. Most of what we do, eating, sleeping, going to the toilet, having sex, doing this, taking this job, going here, picking my nose, going to sleep, waking up, everything we do mostly is driven by the motivation of attachment, which is the junkie in us that wants to get what I want. It sounds very brutal because we just think it's normal, but it's totally self-centered. Of course, we've also got compassion and love and kindness too. That tempers our attachment. But basically, we're locked in samsara, Buddha says, because we're driven by this attachment. But it's very subtle. We can't see it at an ordinary level, Our motivation for most of what we do is negative. It sounds awful to say that. It mightn't be as bad as anger, but it's attached with this junkie that wants to get what I want every second, and that motivates most of what we do, and we're programmed. We're beyond any kind of volition, it's just programmed. So that's why we have to change our habits, physical, verbal, and mental, radically reconfigure, so that we can refrain from at least doing actions with our body and speech that are motivated by delusions, so we stop sowing negative seeds, at least that level. And then gradually, by reconfiguring our mind, by being our own therapist, by doing concentration and knowing our minds well, actively doing actions that are virtuous, motivated by a good motivation. This is what practice is. And it's utterly mixed with ethics. Buddhism is a path of ethics as much as anything, Are we communicating here? So we have to know our minds well. We have to get concentration. We can't get far if we don't get concentration. And most of us in this life won't get concentration because we've got to give up sex, drugs and rock and roll and go to the mountains for at least a couple of years to get some semblance of it seriously. This really it demands full-on attention, to get seriously at levels of concentration. But we can do something every day, there's no doubt. And the reason to have it is so that we can become familiar with our minds, so we can radically change our actions. That's the reason to have concentration, not to be in the present. Are we communicating here? And why? Because you don't want suffering, baby. Eventually you'll be able to benefit others. Don't even go there first. Start having some compassion for yourself first, please. And when you start to realise you're in charge of your life, that means you've got compassion for yourself. It means I'm sick of suffering here. I don't want to get lied to, stolen from, killed, harmed. Thank you very much. I'm going to change my own behaviour because I'm the one who sows the seeds in my mind that will bring my future. It really brings a powerful sense of accountability, really powerful sense of accountability, this view of karma. It's very fascinating. It stops the victim one, but we've got to apply it. Can't just say I believe in it. It's useless. Utterly useless to say you believe in karma. It's like saying you believe in botany. What good is that? Won't get you a garden, I promise. I'm glad you believe in it. It works. It doesn't help you get a garden. Same here. So, okay, again, let's a little bit look into our lives, and we can try and look at these 4 ways that karma ripens. And if we can understand even this much about karma, this idea of the 4 ways that karma ripens, you look into your life, you can divide into these 4 categories, and you can apply this every day. It explains to you immediately why it is happening, and it also, therefore, explains to you how you will then behave in the future, because you know by your learning, I don't want that weed, well, that's a weed I won't plant again. I do want that rose, so I will plant that rose again. So there's 4 ways of understanding how karma ripens, explains your present situation, which informs your present actions, which will bring your future experiences. It's logical, just logical. So like I said, the first one is the type of rebirth we get. And of course that's very abstract for us, We just think we're human and that mummy made us and that's it. But the Buddha says it's just one of many types of rebirths. So for now, we'll just stick to the human one and recognise, given that if we take on board the theory at least of karma, that at least if I die, I want another decent human rebirth and a decent body and a decent family so I can have a decent environment so I can carry on practising my spiritual path. Thinking this way, bare minimum, thinking this way. Then what would you do? How would you look at this? So first of all, we look at trying to interpret our own life. We can see in our life, first we've got a human body. Buddha says you can't imagine how hard you must have worked, particularly at strong, intentional, non-killing. Practice, as Lama Zopa says, no doubt in the context of keeping vows of non-killing in the past, because that makes it very potent. The seeds are very delicious and rich, and one of those would have been triggered at the time of our past death. Simultaneously was triggered all the countless numbers of seeds for all the different tendencies that make up our personality, make up our characteristics, our tendencies. These are our own. These are ours. They're our own habits. Whether it's being good at music or football or killing or whatever you want to call it, they're our own habits from our own practice of these. So we can see if we look at the human planet, a few billion humans, right? And then we look at their personalities, and we can see by people's behaviour, without being rude about people, you can look at the world and you can see that, for example, most humans probably kill. And this is one of the tragedies, you know. Most humans probably kill. And with respect to our religions, I was taught as a Catholic that God made animals for our benefit, for food, etc., etc., you know. Well, that's not the Buddhist view at all, of course. So, you know, most humans kill something. We don't value, more and more a little bit these days, valuing some animals, but we don't really value the bugs, you know, all the revolting creatures. We don't value the rats. We call them vermin. You know, as soon as there's a glut of rabbits in one country, we call them a drag because they upset our idea of, you know, ecology, so we slaughter all the rabbits. If they're rare in another country, we call them precious, and you try and save them. I mean, it's all this attachment, you know. But the idea of killing is something, one of the heaviest ones. One person said, one Lama, he said, if you want to give one instruction to one person, suggest they don't kill. Because killing is the heaviest one and brings the heaviest karmic results to oneself. And this is a tragedy. All these 7 billion humans, like won the lottery, have got born as a human, but then due to past killing and having not purified the habit to kill, and we'll talk about purification, wake up in this life with a tendency to kill, or born in a family where everybody else kills because you've got the tendency to kill yourself, so you get born in an environment where it's easy to kill. So the second way that, in this case, we've got human birth, which is the fruit of non-killing. But we look into our mind and we have one of the tendencies from killing, which is called to kill. We might have a tendency to lie or steal. But we also got a tendency to be kind or loving or to not lie or to not steal. Look at our own mind. We have to know our own mind. And we look into our own mind, our own personality traits. And this is why it's so simple, the Buddhist approach is, why do I have a tendency to lie, to get angry, to be jealous, to be good at music? Yes, your mother might have taught you those things, but that's not, she's just the catalyst. This is the powerful point that karma brings if you try to seriously take the Buddhist view on board. Yes, my mummy taught me music. I can thank her, no question. But I got born with a tendency to play music, Buddha says, because of past music. My mother also got born with her tendency to be good at music because she'd done music in the past. But then she, by teaching me, encourages my tendency. But the tendency has to be in my mind in the first place. My mother doesn't give me music because that's the materialist view. That's not the Buddha's view. That's my tendency. To kill and lie and steal, they are my tendencies. That's why when mothers who have these poor psychotic kids who go around raping and stealing and killing get so guilty because they think they made them. No, they didn't make them. The person brought their own craziness with them, you know. They just had the karma to be their mum. So then we look into our life, we can see why we have those tendencies, they're mine. And then I have to look at those tendencies, and if we're using Buddha's simple view of morality, of good ethics, then we've got, you know, killing and non-killing.